All right. Okay. Hello, everyone. So this is Maria Feekes. I'm Executive Director of Adonis Fertility International. And today we have a long-awaited guest. Guys, I cannot tell you how long, this dream of meeting with Lisa has been in the making. Yes, absolutely. Today we're specifically going to be talking about the birth story of your child. And Lisa, she has done a lot of the evaluation of the research and information available on the topic. She's going to also share her own story, why it's so dear to her as well. But yeah, so we're really hoping to equip you, not just something that, that Lisa just feels, strongly about, or, this is her opinion. This is not just her opinion, right? And Lisa, you will walk us through that. So let's just jump in. And Lisa, if you could start with, just, yes, your story about your company. And then we're going to jump into all of this very important like framework and nuggets of the topic.
Okay. So thank you everyone for coming today. My name is Lisa Schuman. Thank you so much, Maria, for organizing this. I know it takes a lot to get this working, and I really appreciate it. So for all of you out there who don't know me, I am a therapist. I'm an author. I have a podcast called Building Your Family. I have written quite a bit of research, and I've fortunately won awards for my research from the American Society for Reproductive Medicine and the Pacific Coast Reproductive Society. I was the only therapist asked to testify before the State Senate Judiciary Committee to legalize compensated surrogacy in New York, because until 3 years ago, it was not compensated. And because I had done so much surrogacy work outside of the New York area, I had that experience where other therapists didn't have that in New York. And so I've done a lot of things in my career in, the last 30 years. And I've written this book, as you can see in the back. It's also called Building Your Family, which I encourage you to take a look at. It's available on Amazon. It's available on Amazon US and UK. And you can order it on Amazon. You can also order it on Audible if you'd like to listen to your books. So it's available on Audible as well. And of course, as I said, my podcast is called Building Your Family, and that's available on YouTube and all of the audio platforms wherever you listen to audiobooks or where you listen to podcasts. So I try in every way possible, as you can see, to try to give people good information, helpful information that will give them a sense of managing their process. As you know, this is a very complicated process. And many people start thinking, I'm going to get pregnant in the old-fashioned way. And for some people who are single or in the LGBTQ community, you might also think, well, I've already thought about it and I'm accustomed to the idea of doing it kind of differently. But even then, it can be anxiety provoking, right? There's so much to think about going through the medical procedures. Who remembers their, high school biology class? Not many people, right? How this all works and how to think about it and what's important and what's not important. And there's so many things to grapple with, and it can feel really overwhelming. And so I think it's good to have two things. I think it's good to have support. And by the way, I have a monthly support group starting at the beginning of every month. So if you're interested, you can find me on familybuilding.net or email me at lisa@familybuilding.net, and you can sign up for our group. We start March 6th, our March group, and it's a 4-week group, and you have complete access to me, and it's much less expensive than having a private consultation. You can get support from other people who are going through the same journey as you. So it's a very nice way to get support and get information. And today, we're going to talk about thinking about your journey for your future child. So there's a lot to think about because children need to have a good story. The research that we have shows that there are 2 conditions under which children have a lot of difficulty with their story. One is by accidental disclosure. If they find out by accident that their family members used a donor or a surrogate and they didn't know it, and somehow they stumble upon it, they either do 23andMe or they find a piece of information, or they're in school and they do genetic testing, or somehow they discover it. And the second is if there is late disclosure. So if the children grow up and don't really know anything different than what they kind of assume or what their parents tell them, it can be very dysregulating. So as children grow up, from birth, they start to think about themselves in relationship to you. If you think about how you felt when you were a little child, think about your first memory with your parents, right? All you know is what's in your household, right? You're not thinking about, you own a car or you are going on vacation. You just know what's in your surroundings, right? And as you grow up, that starts to expand, right? To your community and then to your village or your town and then out into the world. But at the beginning, you're just starting to form your identity, and that identity gets formed for the majority of, there's some temperament, but the majority of it gets formed by who you're raised by. So if you think about, okay, well, I'm starting to learn that my dad really likes to go bicycle riding on Sundays, and my mom really loves having pizza for dinner. So I think about, well, do I really like going bike riding? Do I like pizza? Am I like my mom? Am I like my dad? Do I have dimples like my mom? My dad loves sports. Do I like sports? And you start to try to figure out who you are in the world as you're developing, right? And as you're developing other things, you're learning how to walk and you're learning how to speak, but you're also bringing in everything around your environment. So if you start to understand, okay, this is how I'm connected to these people, and that's part of who you think you are. And then one day it blows up because you discover that that's not true, that actually you didn't grow in your mommy's tummy, or actually you aren't genetically connected to both of your parents. It can be very upsetting for you because then you think two things. One, you think, well, then who am I? And what does that mean? And if I don't have my mother's dimples, then, who am I connected to? And what does that mean? And does that mean that that person that I'm connected to is a good thing? If my parents were ashamed of telling me, then does that mean that it's a bad thing and I should feel that there's part of me that's not so good? Should I feel that there's something that I can't talk to my parents about, so I can't really share with them how I feel about things in life? And what does it say about me as a human being? Who am I? So it can be very dysregulating for the child. The other part is, of course, trust, right? Because the first and most important foundation of child development is trust. And we build a sense of trust in the world. We as adults can kind of think about how anything can happen in life, right? We can walk down the street and get hit by a car tomorrow. We know all the tragedies and horror of the world, but we somehow trust that we're going to go outside and everything's going to be okay. And that's because as a child, the way that we're built and nature gives us this gift to psychologically develop a sense of trust in the world first. And so if we develop a sense of trust in the world, and that again is partially due to our parents, we feel we can trust them, and then all of a sudden one day we can't trust them. We feel like we cannot trust them anymore. It really shatters our trust in the world and can affect us psychologically. So we really want to trust our parents. Now, for many of you who are going through this, as I said, it can be quite difficult. And so parents very often kind of kick the can down the road, and they don't really want to kind of deal with this because understandably, it's not the first way that you want to build your family, right? It makes sense. And so, of course, it's difficult. Of course, it's a struggle. And of course, it's natural to say, I don't even want to think about these other people. I want to think about my kids and that's it, and just have a happy family. You're tired of treatment. You're tired of spending money. You're tired of hiring lots of professionals. You're tired of all of it. You don't want to have to now deal with another thing. But I promise you, putting a little energy into it in the beginning can reap a lot of rewards later. It will give your child a sense of trust and will help them develop their narrative. Now, unfortunately, for many people, even though this is really important, a lot of people might find it disappointing to know that it's not possible to be anonymous. So some people say, well, I'm just not going to tell, and then I don't have to worry about it. But your child will find out. There's no question. There's 23andMe, there's Ancestry.com. As I said, there's lots of ways to get information on people. There's lots of ways to break into medical records. There's facial recognition on Facebook. At some point, your child will find out. So the question is, do you want them to find out from you, or do you want them to find out in one of these ways that could be hurtful to not just them, but your relationship? So with that, let's talk about a way to think about talking to your children. Okay.
And Lisa, before you start, because I know some of the families who are here, because you're sharing facial recognition and others. So some families said, well, we just done surrogacy. It's the child is fully genetically linked to us. There is no problem with finding any genetic other relationships. So then does it mean we're safe, right? Medical record doesn't say it. In your practice, that you mentioned the word trust, right? And yes, even if it's surrogacy, do you still recommend, or do you see evidence that even if it's genetically connected child, the story about being carried in your womb versus not, is it still very important? I just want to make sure that what you're describing is still relevant to everyone.
Yes.
Right? Because people coming from different journeys.
Yes. Well, it's also important to remember children find out about surrogacy also, not just donor conception. Again, there is a way to find out about everything. Children find, receipts to surrogacy agencies. Children find emails online. Sometimes somebody slips, very often you go through this process and you tell your best friend or your neighbor or the grandmother. And sometimes, on their deathbed, and I can't tell you how many cases I've seen where the grandmother might say, oh, and by the way, I hope you are okay with the fact that you didn't grow in your mommy's tummy. And the child says, what are you talking about? So, you just don't know. The other thing is, in the research, we see that even though it might not seem very concrete to you, what typically happens with these children is they sense something. If you are holding a secret in the family, everybody feels differently. And, you might say, well, if I don't say anything, how can somebody know? So let's think about other things in life. Let's say you hug somebody and you hug them with a certain amount of pressure. And you say, I'm going to hug this person with a certain amount of pressure. Then you hug that same person with the exact same amount of pressure, but you really love them. You love them so much and you're hugging them with the same amount of pressure, but you feel so much love for them. Now, it's the exact same amount of pressure, but you will feel different being the recipient of that hug if you feel like that person loves you. Can you see that love? No, you can't see it, but you can feel it. Children also feel if there's a secret in the home. We see time and time again, if the parents are holding in a big secret, that the children feel it. In addition to that, sometimes, as I said, they find receipts or they overhear their parents talking about it, or you could be in a family meeting, maybe for a holiday, and somebody wants to talk about how the child was born or something like that, and they give a funny look to somebody else because they're saying, like, don't say anything in front of the kids. The kids pick these things up. So it's really important to make sure that you're honest with your children from the beginning or as soon as you can. Now, if you haven't started yet, that's okay. Don't worry about it. We can talk about how to do it later. But it's really important to remember that even though it's never too early, it's also never too late. It's never too late to do this. So I'll give you some ideas about how to think about it, whether using donor conception or surrogacy, and how you can build a story for your child. Okay?
Let's do that. I muted someone.
Did you have a question? Was there a question?
I did not. No. I was just muting. No, it was someone's echo going. So please.
Okay.
I feel like we're all soaking in every word that you say.
Okay.
So please
Okay.
continue.
Okay. All right. So ideally, what we know from the literature is that it can be very helpful to talk to children when they're in the womb. Now, people say, why should I bother doing that? Well, because it's important to practice your narrative. As I said earlier, it's so uncomfortable for so many people to talk about this and to even think about their journey. It's not the way they wanted to have their family. Even if you're a gay couple, wouldn't it be nice if you could both have a baby together? It doesn't matter how you build your family. Everybody would like to have genetically related children and make them themselves. They don't want to have to deal with this. So it can be uncomfortable to talk about this. The other part of the discomfort is people wonder, well, are my kids really going to understand what I'm saying? And how am I going to say it? And they get nervous. They don't want their children to be upset with them. They don't want their children to misunderstand. So sometimes parents start to trip over their words. They might start to say something and then they get nervous, or maybe they say something else and they say, oh, I don't really like that. That doesn't really sound right to me. That doesn't feel good. I'm going to change it. So as they're doing this, their child is picking it up. Children, even at a very young age, as I said, can pick up how the parents are feeling. And so your child is probably not going to say, well, my parents really love me, and that's why they're so awkward around this topic. Your child might say, well, why are my parents so awkward around this topic? Why is that? Is there something wrong? And if there's something wrong with this topic, does that mean there's something wrong with me? Now, remember, if you use donor conception or if you use surrogacy, there's some part of this child's story that doesn't belong to you, right? That's not connected to you. This person who contributed to them growing up and coming into the world is inside of them. This is how they were created, right? You want them to feel that all of them is good, not just the pieces of them that belong to you. You want them to feel like everything about them is good, right? So we want to start the story out in a productive way. But how do you do that when you feel nervous about all of these things? So the first part is to practice. So if you are just starting your pregnancy, if you haven't even started yet, or if you have a child or your surrogate is pregnant and you're in this process already, it's good to talk to your partner or your close friend if you're a single parent and start to try on some of the ideas that I'm going to share with you today and see what suits you. You really need to find a narrative that works well for you and your family, something that feels good for you, something that you can own and you can say, you know what, this really is like the Smith family. We really feel like this is our way of communicating. This is our way of handling things. And so you need to find a rhythm and a cadence and a story that works for you. So let's talk about 4 things to think about, okay? So the first thing to think about is difference, because even though, yes, children like to be the same, it's also important to understand that your child's story is going to be different than maybe their best friend's story, maybe different than your neighbor's story. And so you want them to have an acceptance of difference and have a tolerance of difference, because this is also their story, right? They have a different story. Now, what about sameness? Well, children also like to be the same as their friends, right? The girl with the beautiful long red hair in school may feel like, oh, yes, my family members love my beautiful long red hair, but I don't like it because I'm not the same as my friends. Children want to be like their friends, right? They want to have the same Xbox. They want to have the same sneakers. They want to be the same as their friends. So sameness can also be very helpful to incorporate in your story. Then the next part is to start to think about the mechanics of how this happened. How exactly did your child come into the world? What sort of pieces were used? Did you use surrogate? Did you use an egg donor? Did you use a sperm donor? Did you use pieces from your body, your egg, or your sperm? It's important to kind of think about how this all came together, kind of in a technical way, so you could really explain it. And as your child develops in age, they'll start to absorb it in different ways. And we can talk about development a little bit later, but as they grow up, they will take the same information that we're going to talk about today and start to understand it in more intricate ways over time. So you just have to lay it out for them, present them with the information. Then the last piece is their own personal story. So children love to hear about themselves, right? They love to hear their own personal story. They want to understand about how they came into the world. They want to understand, their story and how it might be different about their parents and all sorts of nice little anecdotes that you can include. So let's walk through how to do this in this manner. So on my website, it's familybuilding.net. In the back, there's a list of books you can take a look at, and I'm going to show you a few of them today. So this is a book that talks about difference. Now, there are a lot of books like this. You don't have to purchase this one, but there are lots of books that talk about difference. I really like this book from the 1970s called We All Sing with the Same Voice, because it's all about how we're all different, but we all have this sing with the same voice. But there's lots of books. This is a lovely book also because it also talks about difference. So, sometimes you have two moms, sometimes you have one dad, sometimes you live in a house, sometimes you live in an apartment. There's all kinds of ways to build your family, and there's no one right way to build a family. What you really need is love to build a family, and you're showing different sorts of families. Then, as you talk about sameness, there are books like this that help you understand how things are the same. So in your scenario, no matter who you are, if you use an egg donor, a sperm donor, a surrogate, or all three, all of you have the same story because you all use three parts. Everybody in the world came into this world with three parts. Nobody is different in that way. We know that, science is moving and things will change at some point, but everybody has these three parts. And so even if your child's story is different than your neighbor's story, they still had these three parts, and that can be really helpful for children to understand. Okay. Now, one of their three parts, you talked about surrogacy, is about surrogacy, right? So this is kind of talking about the mechanics of surrogacy. This is a nice story about kangaroos that carry other kangaroos in their pouches to help other kangaroos. This is a cute book also about surrogacy, about koalas that carry other little koalas in their pouches for them. And if you're using a donor, there's nice books about donors. This is kind of a more technical story. So if you're interested in kind of a technical way of expressing it, you can talk about putting the egg and the sperm together. You make an embryo. You can make a baby that way. If, let's say, you like a storybook, this is a story about two elephants. They go to a doctor elephant. The doctor elephant says, if you need to have a baby, you're going to need this other person to help you. And you find this other lady elephant, and she helps them have a baby elephant. So there's lots of different ways to put your story together. And let's say if you're a single parent, let's say you're a single woman, you might want to have specific stories like why I don't have a father and what that means. If you're a gay or lesbian couple, you might want to talk about that and what your family looks like and how that matters to you. And there's lots of other books that talk about things in metaphor or different ways. And then the last part is, as I said, developing your own story. So this is a book that I created, but you can certainly create your own if you're interested in you're a crafty person and you like doing that. But the idea is that this is not about your child's first or second birthday party. This is about how they came into the world and how their story developed, because you want them to understand how that works so they can absorb it over time. So the way you would start would be, and if you want, I have a video about this on my website, familybuilding.net. But this is about how we met. So you start with how did we meet and what was so special about our relationship and what mattered to us as two people wanting, or one person wanting to have a family. Maybe you then take information from your agency or from your clinic and you can put it in here. Maybe you have receipts from your plane trip, or you have your doctor's business card that you want to put in there. And then you can start to talk about your story. So maybe you talk about, your plans for the childbirth and what that was going to be like for you, what was important for you in planning out the birth story. You can write a letter to your child here and talk about things that were important to you, how their name was chosen. Maybe you want to talk about people who were really important to you. Maybe you're along the way talking about your story and you talk to your grandmother or your aunt or uncle about this, and they say something that's really cute that you're going to forget by the time your child grows up, and you want to just memorialize it and put it here. And then you start to build a family tree. So here you have room for everyone in the story. So if you're two parents, you might put yourselves here. If you have an egg donor or a sperm donor, if you have a surrogate, you could put the surrogate's partner here, or maybe you just put the surrogate and the donor, however you want to do it. And then you put your whole family here. So now you have this story that helps the child understand, even if they're very young, the idea of how they came into the world. Now, little children do not have abstract reasoning yet. This is not something that they develop until they're around 6 or 7 years old, but they have a visual representation of what their family looks like. And that can really help. Looking at a picture can help absorb that understanding. So as they can see, these are the people who helped contribute to bringing them in the world. These are the people who helped bring them, plan together to bring them into the world. So even if you're not a genetically linked parent, you put yourself here because it's all the people who came together to plan to bring this child into the world. Then you have the family members. So some of these people are the same and some are different. And that's okay, because your child is going to see that this is how the whole family was created. And that could be a really nice way for your child to understand how they came into the world and what was important in developing them. And as your child grows up, they may start to look at this book from time to time and find that it can be helpful to them. Maybe you put it in their bookshelf as they get a little bit older. And then when they have questions about things, they can look at this and refer back to it as something that they can look at with or without you. But it gives them this story with all of their information in one place, and it really can help them understand the nice story that you've built for them. Anything along the way, if your surrogate, says cute things, or she loves taking pictures of her belly, or she goes out into the supermarket and people say to her, oh, you're having a baby, when do you do? And she says, well, I'm having a baby for this other family and I love them so much, and whatever, cute anecdotes that you can think about along the way, you want to put in here, because those are things you're going to forget, and nice things that your child will remember and feel so good about. And they're going to repeat those things to you because it's going to make them feel good. So I think that putting these 4 steps together and thinking about it in that way can really give you a framework where you can start to think about, how do I want this narrative to look? How can I start to think about all of these pieces? And then practice it. Practice it with your partner, practice it with your best friend. Think about how you want to develop a narrative. And that might change over time. You might, sit there giving your baby a bottle and starting to think about, I want this story to be like this. And maybe after some time you change it because your child reminds you of something that you want to add into the story. And that's fine to change it over time. But what's important is to get started thinking about these things, practicing them, thinking about how to build your child's story. And it will be an investment for you of time, but it's really an investment for your future and for your future child. You want your child to trust you. You want to be that ally for your child in their self-discovery as they move forward in life. If they have a question about something, you want them to come to you, right? You don't want them to think they can't talk to you. So this way you're opening up the story and you're giving them everything, and they know they can trust you. They know they can come to you. They know that they don't have to worry that you're going to be nervous about talking about these things because you've already expressed it, and they can really be much closer to you. And of course, that's what every parent wants.
Oh, so beautiful. Can I ask you, I want to ask a couple questions that came ahead of time.
Sure.
One was, what age is the best to tell the children? From what you saying right now, I'm hearing that, start like, even if it's, newborn, you already start saying it. But let's say that moment was already missed. What would it be? If it's not a newborn, then when?
So, as I mentioned, it's never too early, but it's never too late. So I have worked with families whose kids are older, and we try to help them figuring out, if I had just had a family who had twins who they were 13 years old and they still hadn't told their story. So we worked on helping them develop a life book and finding a way to manage telling the story. So yes, it's not an ideal situation at 13, but it's better to start whenever you can. Even if you have a child who's a little bit older, it's better to start, the earlier the better. But if you can start as soon as you can, that is an ideal circumstance, because the younger you can do it, the easier it is for you in the long run. It's going to be more difficult as a child gets older.
Okay, wonderful. If it's a little bit later, I would imagine not newborn, but one parent was asking, should a child be told in the presence of a child therapist? Is it necessary?
No, no,
Okay.
no. I think this is, your experience with your child is what's going to be important, right? When you're looking in your child's eyes and they're looking at your eyes, they're looking at you thinking, I want to trust my parent. I love my parent. And you are going to be communicating that love to them. And that's the most important thing, because if you can start to talk about these subjects, which might feel difficult for you, but if you could start to talk about these subjects and do it when you're talking to your child, that is the biggest hurdle for you to get over, right? It can be very difficult to do it because you might have reservations about it, anxieties about it. But if you can start to talk to your child and practice talking to them about all these things, you can even do it in other ways. We have lots of different ideas if you'd like to reach out to us. But like, for example, if you're sitting on the floor playing with your child and you have a little toy truck, maybe you say, oh, this little toy truck is very cute. You know what? This reminds me of your story, because the toy truck is made by Ford, but the engine is made by Ferrari. And this is just like us, right? This is how we came into the world. You have our engine, but the surrogate carried you. She helped you. Or maybe we used a donor and that's the engine, and yet you also used your father's sperm or whatever. So you can come up with different ideas or metaphors or talk about it, as time goes forward. Maybe you're watching a cartoon with your child and you can say, oh my gosh, that character really reminds me of your surrogate because she's so sweet. She always takes care of people, and that reminds me of your surrogate. So you're bringing it up in different scenarios, but it gives your child the sense that you feel comfortable with it, right? Because they have to feel comfortable with it. So as you do that and connect with your child around it, it gets easier and easier over time. And that's what you really want to practice.
Okay, beautiful, beautiful. And guys, please, if you have any specific questions, start typing it in. But I'm just going through my list as some of the parents are asking. One question came up, and you kind of maybe a little bit touched on it. You said, well, you repeated it several times. You said that we might not feel comfortable. We delay things. We don't feel comfortable, right? So one of the parents had a beautiful question saying, well, gosh, like if it already starts with me, we as a family don't feel comfortable, sharing some of those things. It means that perhaps we as a couple or as a family, we have not accepted deep in our heart that it's okay that our journey is different. Some families saying, gosh, like in our neighborhood, we are the only people, like we feel like we're such outsiders. What do you recommend parents then to do, right? Because if there is still some of this unresolved, struggle and some thoughts, like you said, children would feel some of that, even if you verbalize different, but deep inside there is this ache that never goes away. So what would you recommend?
So I think there's two parts to what you're saying. So one is that's why practice is so helpful. So if you feel really uncomfortable with it, practice with your partner or practice with your friend. And as you're practicing, you might say, okay, once upon a time, little Johnny, and then you think, oh, I don't really like that. I like this idea. I like to talk about it in metaphor, or I like to talk about it in a storybook fashion, or I like to talk about it in very technical terms. Maybe you start to look at some different books and get some ideas, and maybe you think, well, I really like that idea. And then maybe at some point you change it and you think, I want to do it differently. So you practice with your partner and think, okay, that feels good. And then you try it out with your child, and then you can mold it and change it over time. But the more you practice, the better you will get, and the more real it will become for you, and the more comfortable it will become for you.
Mhm.
Now, the second issue, which you just raised, is what about the neighbors? So you might feel like, and I'm not saying anyone out there is asking this question, but lots of people say, what about the neighbors? What if I tell my child and they say it to the neighbors? So there's two things to think about. Number one, the story belongs to your child. It doesn't belong to anyone else. So you can decide if you're that sort of person, you want to tell everybody. That's up to you. Or you can just tell your child and let them make the decision. You might be in a situation where I'm going to tell my child and I don't really want to tell the neighbors. I don't want to tell the teacher. I don't want to, you have to tell the pediatrician, of course, but you don't have to tell the teacher necessarily. You don't necessarily have to tell the soccer coach or whoever else is in your neighborhood. So you may say, I'm not going to tell them. And if someone finds out, you can say, well, that's really my child's story to share or not to share. And I'm leaving it up to them to make a decision about whether or not they want to share it. Now, some people say, well, my child's going to share every detail. Kids don't really think about it. If you present it in a very casual way, chances are, at least when they're young, they're going to receive it in a casual way. So I'll give you an example of a woman I work with who came to the doctor because she wanted to have a baby by herself and she needed a donor sperm. So she tells her son this story about how she needed a donor sperm, but she was a single woman. And so she had to save a lot of money to pay all the bills. And then she found a sperm donor and he was so wonderful and all these things about him. And she went to the doctor and she tried to get pregnant and he was not able to make embryos. She explained how you take the sperm and the egg and you put them together and make an embryo, and he puts it inside of her body, and it didn't work. And then it didn't work again. And then finally he said, you know what, I'm sorry to tell you this, but you also need an egg donor because your eggs are not working. So you need the eggs from this nice lady, and she's going to help us because then you can use those eggs and the sperm donor sperm and make an embryo, but this will be a younger embryo, so you have a better chance. So this mother went back and she saved some more money because it's very expensive, and she worked very hard, and she went back to the doctor and said, okay, I'm ready. He found an egg donor. She was lovely. She loved the sperm donor. They made an embryo. They put the embryo in her body, and lo and behold, she got pregnant, and that was her son. So she tells this whole long story to her son, and she has all different ways of telling it. And her son goes to kindergarten, around 5 years old, and he walks up to his friends and he says, you know what? I was really expensive. That's all he says. That's it. He doesn't say anything about this whole long story. He just tells his friends he was very expensive. And his friends are like, okay, fine, let's go play on the swings. Like they don't even pay attention to it. So people worry about these things that are very often not going to happen. And even if they do happen, children don't usually care. And even if they cared and they told their parents, I think you can explain to them that you're telling your child this information because you believe it belongs to them. And that's it.
Beautiful, beautiful. Here is a, I think, very good question. Thank you for asking, guys. What are the red flags? Meaning, what should parents avoid in their stories if there are such things exist?
Yeah. So I think the most important thing to avoid is the parents hurt. And there's usually a lot of hurt in these circumstances, right? Some people use surrogates because they want to, but very often people use surrogates or donors because they need to, right? If you're a single parent, then you want to use a sperm donor, right? But you may not need an egg donor unless you have infertility issues. And if you need that egg donor because of infertility issues, it might be very sad every time you think about it, right? Because you're thinking about your own infertility, your own hurt, your own pain. Maybe you have a medical issue that doesn't allow you to carry, and that's been very upsetting for you because you always wanted to carry. Now, some people say, that's fine, I don't care, I never really wanted to carry anyway. But for some people, it can be very hurtful and very painful, this whole process. And so that is not something that belongs to the child. That's our problem, our grief, our loss that we need to make peace with. We don't want to burden our children with that because that's not their problem, right? They came into the world innocent. They didn't ask, to use a sperm donor or an egg donor. We did this because we wanted to be parents and we decided we wanted to proceed with that. So if we have a lot of hurt, pain, miscarriages, all of that, I don't think, particularly at a young age, it's important to share that with the child.
Okay, thank you. That's very good. What if in the future parents notice, it could be not related to, the story, the fertility journey, none of that, but I could imagine where even just simple regular journey, right, without additional stories, when kids are maybe in teenage years or something, they could be like acting out, right? And sometimes children could say some mean things without really
Yeah.
meaning it because they know that they could hurt you. What
Yes.
if parents are noticing some of those things? What could be support for the parents? Like, how do you continue communicating the endless love and that, yes, differences, sameness, all of that is there?
Well, that's what parents worry about, right? What if my child says, "You're not my mom," or something that's really hurtful? So first of all, teenagers' job is to be mean to their parents, right? They're going to look for some way to hurt you. So I'm going to give you an example from my book, and if you want to buy my book, but I think it's important to, again, be honest with your child, but also look for any underlying issues. So I have the story in my book of this mother who talked to her child and used to read to her child a lot at bedtime. So her daughter gets to be in around first grade where they're starting to read on their own quite a bit. And the mother thinks, okay, I don't really need to spend as much time in the bedroom with the child at night reading to them because now they can read on their own. So she spends a little time and then she leaves and lets the child read by herself. So one day, her daughter says, "Mom, I want to meet my egg donor." And the mother says, "Okay." And she's thinking, oh boy, what is she going to say? And she says, "Okay, what do you think that you're going to find? I'm happy to help you. I'm just wondering how you're feeling about it," which is always important to talk to the children about, not to say no, you want to say yes to them, but you also want to see what they're thinking. So she said, "Well, Mom, I think she'd be really nice and a lovely person." And the mother said, "Yes, of course she's going to be a lovely person. That goodness is inside of you, and I love you, and that's all great. But what do you think you'd really be looking for?" And she said, "I think that she would read to me more at night."
Oh, guilt.
So, so the mother said, "Are you upset that I don't read to you at night anymore?" And she said, "Yes, Mom, I'm really upset about that."
Okay, so it's really important to get to the underlying issues and
Mhm.
don't get upset about this on the surface because like what you're saying, they're sharing something much deeper, which is
Yes.
completely not related. Well, that also brings me to idea. And I know when we were talking, you said, "Gosh, Maria, like this is a question on its own, like whole new webinar." But let's at least like spend 5 minutes or something on it. What about siblings? Siblings who come from different journeys, siblings who come in a natural way, siblings who come maybe from different donors or different surrogates. How do you deal with that, especially if kids, when kids sometimes could be mean to each other as well, and one says, well, my mama and papa loves me more because I am blah blah blah. What do you do
Yeah.
about that?
So yeah, I think every situation is different, and yes, we could spend a whole day on that, but I think in general, it's really important to make sure that in the family, there is no teasing each other. Everybody is equal in this family. We all love each other equally. We are all in the same, oh, something just happened.
Uh, that's okay. Let's just continue. Yeah, I
It
think
says
something removed.
reload. What's happened here?
We can hear you. We can hear and see you.
Do you have my screen, or what are you looking at now?
Yeah, I see your screen. I hear you well.
Let me see if I
Everyone give
can.
a thumbs up. Can everyone hear and
I
see
have,
it?
you know what? I have to just give me 1 second, because I have to make it bigger, because I can't, I have all sorts of information on my computer. I can't have.
We don't see your screen. No, sorry. We do not. I should have said, we see your video. We see your face. We do not see your desktop.
Oh,
I
oh,
apologize.
okay.
I misspoke.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. All right. So that's fine. Okay. So I think what's really important is to think about making sure that the kids don't tease each other, and that and they're going to, and you have to stop them. That's just what's going to happen. Some siblings get along more easily than others. But when the teasing happens around this issue, the parents really need to kind of set the record straight and say, everyone in this family is an equal member. Now, sometimes you'll have the opportunity to make it more equal, because let's say one kid used a surrogate, one kid used a donor, and then you have the parents, or maybe you have one kid they did use a surrogate, one kid they didn't use a surrogate. So in those situations, you could say everybody came into this family in a different way, right? Mom and dad are not genetically related. We came into this family not being genetically related. One of you is genetically related, one isn't. One we used a surrogate, one we didn't. We all came into this family in a different way. Now, sometimes you have one fully biological or genetically linked child, and then you have one that isn't. Again, I think it's important to reinforce that everyone is the same in this family, and we all treat each other equally, and we don't tolerate any teasing each other about that.
Beautiful. Okay. So send ground rules and be strong
Yeah.
with it. Yes, so they feel that
Yes.
as well. Okay, wonderful. Guys, we have 10 minutes. If there is anything that coming to your mind, I know a lot of information have been shared. We're definitely going to share archive. We're going to share the link to Lisa's, website that she referring. It definitely has a lot of incredible information. I also listened to some of Lisa's podcast, phenomenal. So
Thank you.
definitely, yes. There is also, you didn't mention this document, but I thought it was very beautiful. It's a PDF that I think, when someone signs up for your newsletter,
Yes.
PDF came up that says 10 things donor-conceived child wants their parents to understand. It's spoken in a child's voice. To me, it was a big opening. It was very well written,
Thank you.
very thoughtful. So I thought it was a very great perspective as well. So hopefully, I mean, guys, feel free to use it, once you sign up for newsletter.
Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. So we've spoken about siblings, we've spoken about, another question did come up. What about, I know we're saying donor, surrogate. In your practice, have you ever seen where those words are maybe too like label and too complicated? Is there additional like name that people could use, I don't know, like, koala, no, koala bear, you had some books, but I don't know. I just don't know if some
Yeah.
of words, surrogate, gestational carrier, donor, like, to me, this seems quite complicated.
Yeah. Well, I think, we can make them as simple or complicated as we want. We can say this is your donor, But sometimes people will change that over time based upon what the child says. So maybe the child wants to call her Amy, or maybe that your donor's name because it's a friend of yours, or maybe you met them and so you can call her Sarah. I mean, that would be a nice thing if you have a name for your surrogate or donor, you can call them by the name. But sometimes kids like to make up names, like Boo Boo or whatever that your child might want to call them. Sometimes after time goes by, if they have a donor, let's say, who they feel very connected to them, they use a biological connection, but sometimes they don't. So I think it's really helpful to let your child take the lead on that. You can start out with the donor and the surrogate again, unless you know their names. And then as your child grows up, you can see, I think you've probably seen on my podcast, I have people who are donor conceived on my podcast, and they talk about different stories. One really wanted to meet her donor, one did not. One feels like her donor is a connection to her, and the other one feels connected to donor siblings, and some people don't. So everybody has a different sort of experience. Some people have an ongoing relationship with their surrogate, where the surrogate is always in touch with them and involved in their life. And some people just, send a Christmas card once a year, and that they feel very comfortable with that. So everybody has to find their own relationship. And then after that, let your child develop their own relationship, their own understanding of who that person is and what it means to them.
Okay, wonderful. Couple more questions. Let's see how many we could get through. Tell me if we're getting 5 minutes over or something. Are you okay with that?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. What do you say if donor is anonymous?
Excuse me?
What do you say to a child if the donor is anonymous? You cannot use her name. You don't really know anything about her. It's anonymous donor. Like in Ukraine, for example, every donor is anonymous. We have some families, who use the donors from Ukraine. So there is absolutely no way that they could meet, them in the future or have anything like that. So what would you say if anonymous?
Well, I would talk to them in the beginning about their story. I would establish the story first with using the egg donor. And then as they get older, if they want to meet the donor, we don't know that they're going to be anonymous. I mean, right now in the US, you can find anyone you want through 23andMe. I mean, it's possible to find anybody. And, as I said, on Facebook, there's facial recognition. So your child might be able to find that donor at some point, and technology is changing all the time. So we might be able to find somebody, on the other side of the world. And we can't right now, but we might be able to find somebody on the other side of the world. So I wouldn't shut that down entirely. I would say, unfortunately, we don't have a way to meet or connect with the donor yet. But as you get older, things will probably change, as they've changed in the US and a lot of other places. There's a donor registry in England now. There's all kinds of situations happening in Denmark and lots of other countries where things are evolving and people are finding each other. So I would say to the child, if you're curious when you get older, and you want to search, I'm happy to try to help you.
Okay, thank you. Next kind of set of questions, it says, it's important to establish how babies are made. Is it important to establish how babies are made before going into what surrogacy is? Should all of this be done in one settings, or can all this information be spread out? For example, 5-year-old, when thinking about 5-year-old. Concepts of sperm, egg, embryo, and so forth seems like a lot for a small child. Are there milestones to think about when staging this information?
Yeah, so as you can see, these books are made for small children, right? A book like this is very, very simple, and it's not complicated. You just put the egg and the sperm together, and you get a gift from this one. This is an egg donor story, right? So you get a gift from this donor, and then you put the egg and the sperm together, you make an embryo, and they put it inside the woman's body. This story is in a storybook sort of fashion. So there are a lot of books that you can read to children, and certainly you can read to your baby. And as they get older, they start to point out different things. Even if they say, you know, I really like the pink elephant better than the purple elephant, it doesn't really matter. They'll start to, as they get older, they'll start to use these terms. And these terms about their egg donor, the sperm donor, the surrogate, will be part of the backdrop of their life. This will be terms that they'll hear over and over again. So as they grow up and they learn things more deeply, right, this is all going to be the same information. They're just going to start to learn it more deeply over time. As they start to learn it more deeply, they'll be familiar with the words that you're using. They'll be familiar with these terms, egg, sperm, and uterus, right? Those are not, they're complicated to us because that's how we think of them, but they're no more complicated than any other word. So if we explain, these are the pieces in a very simple terms to young children, as they get older, they'll start to look for meaning. And very often people will say, you know, my 5-year-old or 6-year-old came to me asking about my egg donor, and I don't really understand because I've told her the story 1,000 times. But maybe your child is just starting to develop a different way of thinking about things and starting to understand things on a deeper level. And now it's occurred to them, wait a minute, I know these words, but I now understand them in a different context. Now I'm understanding something different than I understood before. You know, when kids are very little, they're, 2 or 3 years old, think about the things that they like, right? They like a Disney princess, or they, look at superheroes, or looking at things that are very concrete, black and white, and that's it. As they get older, they understand things in terms of gray. They start to develop abstract thinking, so they can imagine things in their mind, imagine scenarios in their mind, rather than just having to see something in front of their face. So as their cognition develops, as their maturity develops, they will use those same words, but in different ways.
Okay, okay. And guys, yeah, absolutely always go also reach out to Lisa to help frame that story. Absolutely, yeah. And it seems like a lot of those phasing out will be up to you. So, review the books, see what you're comfortable with, or, create your own. I thought that idea of creating that beautiful book was, quite amazing. So then
Thank
you're
you.
absolutely leading and deciding on when do you start your story, right? And last question, it's a little bit more specific, but it's a very important question, and I know other families could be in similar situation. So it's a situation where the naturally born child has, is a special needs child. And so to have a healthy child, parents had to go through assisted reproductive technology, and they also had to use surrogacy process. The concern is, or the fear is, that the child born through surrogacy healthy could feel that that child was created only for the purpose of, being support, and, for the purpose of the special needs child. Any suggestions? So it literally says, I don't want child with surrogacy feel that she was created because of other child. Do you have
Because the first kid has special needs and they don't want the second one to have special needs.
that was the reason. Let me read exactly how it says. It says, we have a child with special needs, and we had the other child with surrogacy. And I'd be lying if I said we would have had the child with surrogacy without the child with special needs. In a situation like this, what would you suggest? Is it a bit, it is a bit sensitive, and I don't want child with surrogacy feel that she was created because of other child. Do you have any suggestions?
Yes, so I wouldn't necessarily like say we have to pit them against each other and like, this child's so different from this one. Yes, they have differences, but every parent's goal is to have a healthy child, right? We all do. So some people will do genetic screening. Some people will really try to eat healthy in pregnancy. Some people will use an egg donor because they're worried about advanced maternal age with the eggs, and all sorts of things like that. So there's lots of ways that we pursue having a healthy child. So if over time your child says, well, now I understand, I need a surrogate, but my brother doesn't have one. Why is that? You can say, we didn't think we needed to have a healthy baby. We didn't think we needed a surrogate then. but now we see to have a healthy baby, we need a surrogate. So lots of times you change things in your life based upon what you know. And we didn't know that then. So we had this child and we're very happy. We wouldn't trade this child, Joey or whoever it is, for the world. We love him. But we also know that there are other things we can do to try to ensure that you're healthy. Now, maybe there's something else that could happen to you that if we had a third child, we could use, or a fourth child. I mean, science is always changing. Maybe we would do something different, but this is how it happened in our family. We love you the same. We feel the same about both of you. We're so glad we have you both. But as time goes by, you're always going to use new technologies and new ways to try to ensure the health of your children.
Beautiful. Okay. Well, thank you guys. Thank you for all of your questions. If anything was missed, please email me. And we definitely will pass to Lisa as well. And do reach out at your convenience if you feel like it. Also, I'm just so thrilled that Lisa, you found time and you with us and you shared your expertise and all the love and everything you have done. Definitely raising a lot of very important questions. It's just like, if families will forget anything from this from this webinar, what do you want them to walk away with? Like any last minute wish?
Well, again, early and often is a key. The earlier you can talk to your child and the more often you can talk to them, and get used to this story. Get comfortable with it. Even if it's uncomfortable for you, as you practice, you will get much more comfortable.
Okay. Okay. Beautiful. Thanks, everyone. Please expect the
Thank
archive.
you, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.